Today's workshop is Special Education Rule Changes Series Part 2, Adverse Effect and Functional Skills Changes. I will be presenting along with Cassie Santo, Inclusive Practices Coordinator at the Vermont Agency of Education. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassie Santo, and during this portion of the presentation, we are going to focus on the category of the rule changes that impacts our current practices related to adverse effect and the addition of functional skills as a basic skill area when considering adverse effect. We will share some resources related to this information, and then we will move on to responding to pre-submitted questions. Next slide. So I want to start by just centering ourselves with the historical perspective. In the early 1990s, Vermont introduced a rule to operationalize the concept of adverse effect. The stated purpose of the rule change at that time was to establish the consistent application of eligibility standards across the state. Evaluation and planning teams, or EPTs, were required to document 3 measures of educational performance in a basic skill area that falls at or below the 15th percentile, or 1 standard deviation below the mean of a standardized assessment. So essentially, to be eligible for special education in current practice, a student is falling below that 15th percentile on at least 3 different measures in a basic skill area. That is how adverse effect has been defined, and probably how many of you as parents have heard it during your meetings, that 15th percentile threshold at both initial and triennial eligibility meetings. So for 30 years, Vermont has been the only state to operationalize adverse effect in this way. Next slide. So this is all changing in July of 2023. Starting July 1, Vermont is returning to an eligibility definition of adverse effect that's actually in line with most other states. It's a definition which relies on evidence-based results, continuous progress measures, as well as other examples of student work, including the effect of functional skill deficits, which demonstrates that the student's disability has a negative impact on their basic skill or basic skill development. So rather than wait until students fall into that lowest 15th percentile of their grade level peers, it's possible that earlier identification can be made, which might result in the provision of more timely and appropriate supports and services for students in need. It is predicted that the discussion of when and how students most appropriately get their educational and functional skill needs met becomes the focus rather than meeting an operational standard. To this end, in addition to the basic educational skill areas that already exist, the new regulation includes functional performance as a basic skill for evaluation and planning team members to consider when documenting adverse effect for a student. We're going to take a dive into functional skills on the next slide, but just for reference, when we talk about basic skill areas under adverse effect and the addition of functional skills, that is where functional skills was added. Although the new regulation no longer requires the documentation of 3 measures of adverse effect for a basic skill area, those measures, which could be grades, performance on assessments, attendance, observations, samples of student work, all of those things should continue to be used to substantiate an adverse effect. And this includes evidence in that additional category being added July 1, which is functional skills. So another layer of this rule going into effect July 1 of this year is that functional skills will be added to the list of basic skill areas. Functional skills is defined as the acquisition of essential and critical skills needed for a child with disabilities to learn specific daily living, personal, social, and employment skills, or the skills needed to increase performance and independence at work, in school, in the home, in the community, for leisure time, and for post-secondary and other lifelong opportunities. Functional skills reflects the student's current abilities, their strengths, their weaknesses, academically, socially, physically. This should always have been embedded in IEPs, so that's not necessarily new. And knowing this information about a student should always shape the goals of their IEP to inform how their learning differences related to functional skills impacts their ability to learn in the general education curriculum. The newness here.
Cassie,
Yeah.
I'm noticing the slides don't seem to be advancing.
Oh, I forgot to say next slide. I'm sorry, guys. I was planning on presenting this myself. So we're right here. And I don't have next slide in my notes. So sorry. But just for reference, the newness here is that this is now listed with other basic skill areas when considering adverse effects. Next slide. This is a list of examples and categories where functional skills might fall. This information was pulled from one of our guidance documents, which we're going to share later on, and it's going to come through in that email that Karen mentioned. And it's not an exhaustive list because the range of functional skills is as varied as the individual needs of children with disabilities. This list does give some insight into examples that might fall in the categories of social, emotional, and communication skills, independent living skills, and transition. The link to the guidance document is going to contain that full list, and it also touches on examples of individually administered assessments that teams might use to measure functional skills, as well as some case studies to support the thinking around this topic. And so that link is going to come through in the email you receive after this. Next slide, please. Next, I want to review some forms that are associated with this rule change, forms that you might be familiar with. As you can imagine, the changes to the definition of adverse effect impacts how we document this information. So Form 2 is the AOE created form that's utilized for special education evaluation reports for all disability categories. This form might look different district to district, as schools are not required to use our forms, but their forms must include all the information that our forms hold. So we're looking at section 2 of this form, which is adverse effect. This is where all the information that we're talking about would be documented. Just for reference, the first section of the form is determining the disability category. So once that determination has been made, you're coming down to section 2 of Form 2, the adverse effect section. This is where functional skills is living as a basic skill area, as well as the changes related to confirming that there's an adverse effect, which is no longer dependent on those 3 measures below the 15th percentile. We're going to take a minute to look at those 2 sections. So next slide, please. This first visual is a visual of the top portion of section 2 of the adverse effects section. This is intended, again, for the evaluation plan and report. So when teams are considering the basic skill area for an initial or reevaluation, this is the section of that form where some changes are happening. So you'll see on that right column on the bottom, functional performance and skills has been added under the basic skill area of concern. So that's the first difference you're going to notice on this section of the form. Next slide, please. The other difference I want to point out, and I realize this is tiny, it might be hard to see, but on the left is our old form where we are talking about that 15th percentile standard, right? So that's the image on the left. I assume that many parents and families are used to seeing something along those lines. That's not what it will look like anymore after July 1. So our previous form walked evaluators through a variety of possible measures and then asked if it was at or below the 15th percentile. So historically and in our current world, to be eligible for special education, that's where 3 of those measures had to be below the 15th percentile. Now looking at the image from the new form on the right, this image illustrates how future us is analyzing adverse effect. We're still looking at it, we're still considering all the measures, but we don't have to use 3 different measures. And we're no longer measuring adverse effect with that 15th percentile standard. We're just not going by that definition anymore. So when we analyze adverse effect, we are asking teams to consider if that measure demonstrates adverse effect. And that's a team decision based on the data the team has available to them when making these determinations. Next slide, please. I'm hoping that visual helps. I also wanted to give this in a textual format, even though I'm sounding very repetitive. There's no longer a minimum number of measures, but multiple measures are expected to be documented. And no single piece of evidence or measure of school performance is required by regulation. So that just means teams can use the number and types of evidence necessary for an individual student to determine adverse effect. Adverse effect is then determined by a review of all available evidence, be it test scores, work samples, observations, whatever measures are available to support the team's decision-making process. Next slide, please. There are some exceptions to this rule. The exceptions to this rule are the disability categories of specific learning disability and deaf blindness, where the current federal rules do not require such documentation. SLD and deaf blindness are excluded in the rule, as the definitions of these categories already requires an adverse effect. The criteria for determining SLD and deaf blindness has changed slightly to no longer explicitly include a separate adverse effect consideration. Instead, the determination of these categories inherently includes evidence that the student's educational performance has been impacted. I just want to be clear here that this is for the disability categories of specific learning disabilities and deaf blindness only. IDEA recognizes 13 different disability categories. One of those is SLD, another is deaf blindness. Another disability category identified by the IDEA is hearing loss, which encompasses deafness and hard of hearing. So for that disability category and for the other disability categories, the adverse effect rules apply. We're going to talk about this more next week when we focus on specific learning disabilities and the removal of the discrepancy model. But for now, I just wanted to acknowledge that these exceptions exist, and we'll do a deeper dive next week. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to draw everyone's attention to some resources that are out there. Again, these are going to come through in that email. The first is the Adverse Effect Memorandum. This memo from the AOE in January 2022 covers the background and the changes to Rule 2362 related to adverse effect. A lot of this resource is what we covered here in the presentation. So this is just a way that you can kind of take some of this information in through a written format. The 3-gate eligibility determination guidance is a document from the AOE that covers the criteria for all 3 gates, as they've historically been called, for special education eligibility that must be met and documented. This document walks families through the 3 criteria that a student has to meet to be eligible for special education services from the stance of the rule changes being in effect. So that's the 3-gate eligibility determination, and it highlights that criteria after July 1. And the guidance document that I made reference to is the 3rd link here on the slide. That's to the functional performance changes. This includes the examples of functional skill areas, case studies, types of assessments that might be used, and just other general information to support this rule change. There's also a pre-recorded webinar with that and a slide deck that reviews that document. I realize you might not be able to access them right now, but like we've said, it will come through that email. Next slide,
Cassie,
please. Oh,
Cassie,
yeah.
could you slow down just a little bit? Some of our participants are asking if you could just slow it down a little. Thank you.
Sure. The next resource I just want to highlight for you all is the K-12 Evaluation Implementation Guide. This guide is designed for practitioners and administrators. It sets forth recommendations for quality implementation of state regulations related to the evaluation process. So although it's written through the lens of practitioners and administrators, this guide lays out that entire process, the federal and state regulations as they are related to the process. It's full of checklists, visuals, and tons of resources that can support you with understanding how an evaluation might manifest within your local school. The last resource here is a case study that was created that goes through eligibility for a student. His name is Wesley, who's found eligible under the basic skill area of functional skills. This case study provides a narrative that aligns with the system of support and the special education rule changes. Through this case study, there's accompanying paperwork. There are examples of the special education referral process and how it could operate within the overall district or school system of support. This is a case study that goes deeper than the others that you'll find in our guidance document. It has a 7-page narrative that walks the reader through one potential case of how this could look. Then it also includes examples of all that corresponding paperwork. So if you're curious how that adverse effects section might look when filled out, you could check that out. The parent input form, all of those are filled out and might offer some additional insight into the process and the corresponding paperwork. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen now on this next slide for the final resources, and then we'll talk about pre-submitted questions.
Okay, thank you, Cassie. So this slide covers some of the resources available to parents. Our helpline that is staffed on weekdays from 9 to 4:30. Also, we have links to some workshops that we have done over the last year. One of them is specifically about the rules, and then another one on evaluations, and the third one on the evaluation plan and report. These were done at the beginning of the school year, so it will have some information of the rules that were, but it also does have reference to the changes that will be. Next slide. So this page just shows our general resources. That includes our website. We have fact sheets. We do have closed Facebook pages only for parents of children and adult children. There are 2 pages with disabilities or special health needs. We have our social media presence on Facebook and Instagram. And we do have a transition toolkit for youth with disabilities containing a variety of transition-related resources. And I think we are at the end of our slides, so we can stop slide sharing. So VFN has prepared a number of FAQs for the AOE based on what we have heard from families. So I will go ahead and ask those questions, and Cassie will provide the answers. So the first question is, what will districts be looking for in determining adverse effect? What will the AOE be looking for in districts appropriately determining adverse effect?
So we cannot speak on behalf of districts. They do have the guidance and the rule changes and access to us for technical assistance. The AOE does monitor and look at IEPs, and determining adverse effect is based on a review of evidence, and the existence of adverse effect is determined by the IEP team, which includes parents. So those elements of evidence would be considered when we're looking at how districts are determining adverse effect.
And how often does this monitoring occur, Cassie?
There's monitoring is a complex thing that I'm not going to be able to speak to. I believe there's 3 different types of monitoring that can go on. It would be a complex topic to go into now.
Okay, thank you. I'll try not to throw any that we haven't actually sent you. If a child was found not eligible, so for a week, a month, a year prior to July 1st, can they request another special education evaluation?
So if your child is not found eligible and you agree with that decision, another evaluation cannot be requested until a full year has passed since the completion of the prior evaluation, unless the LEA and the parent agree otherwise. So that is if you agree with the decision that your child was not found eligible. If the LEA and parent agree, they could proceed with another evaluation before that year mark. If a student is found not eligible and the parents disagree with the evaluation, a parent might request an independent educational evaluation at public expense if he or she is in disagreement with the evaluation obtained by the LEA.
Okay, and what is the AOE doing to support districts with these rule changes?
We have hosted bi-weekly office hours for the field, covering a variety of topics related to the special education rule changes. We posted the content on that website, which I believe is going out with the other resources, so the field can access that content from our presentations if they were not able to attend. This year, we released the K-12 Evaluation Implementation Guide that I mentioned earlier, along with 2 case studies to support the eligibility process. There is the one Wesley that we talked about, and one that we'll share next week, Mateo, which is another case study outlining how this process could happen. We're available for questions through our TA line, and there have been Microsoft forms that have been shared with the field as another way to collect questions related to these changes.
And parents can call the TA line as well, right, Cassie?
Yeah, I believe it might be an email, but yes.
Great. So what are functional skills?
So
is this new, and how are they measured and evaluated? It's one of the many questions in a row. And what could services look like?
Yeah, so functional skills can encompass some of what we have already discussed and more. The expectation of integrating functional skills within an IEP is not new, but eligibility under that basic skill area of functional skills is what is new. Services are going to look different school to school, district to district, And in that guidance document released by the AOE related to this topic, there are several examples of how this might look on an IEP. So I would recommend checking out that document.
So if my child has good academic cognitive skills, could they be found eligible for special education based on the functional skills that adversely impact functional performance?
So a child could be eligible for special education under the basic skill area of functional performance that adversely impacts the student's access and progress in education. So you're thinking about, where does the child stand in terms of functional performance? How does the child's disability affect functional performance? And from there, how does it impact his or her involvement and progress in the general education curriculum?
So what could an IEP look like for a concern with functional skills?
So this is another area that is going to have a lot of variability, and it will manifest so differently student to student, team to team, school to school. I would recommend looking at the case studies in the guidance document as a starting place for how goals and services might manifest.
Okay, this is a question that came in as part of the registration. How can we get a school to use non-academic delays to get through the gates?
According to the new rules, functional skills, which could be considered non-academic, has been added as a basic skill area under adverse effect when considering the second criteria for special education eligibility. And those new rules apply to all LEAs.
And this is another question that was submitted. How do the rule changes affect IEP and Section 504 services for students with hearing loss?
So these rules are not related to 504s, and the special education rule changes do not generally affect students with hearing loss any differently than students in other disability categories outside of the SLD deaf blindness piece that we talked about, where teams are addressing adverse effect in a different fashion. And we're going to talk about that next week. But otherwise, the rule changes are not different in relation to IEP for students with hearing loss. Not different than what I described here.
Okay, so we are at the end of the FAQs that were prepared for this presentation, but we do welcome questions, and I think Martha has been keeping track of those questions.
Yes, thank you, Karen. So we have several questions that have come in. The first one would be, how will this impact students with higher cognition that currently wouldn't qualify in Vermont, but who are clearly in need of assistance with functional skills? Do you have any tools for assessing functional skills you can share? And I think those were included in the chat. Correct me if I'm wrong.
The case studies in the guidance document?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And for additional tools, I honestly, I don't feel like I can answer this question, and this is one I'd like to bring back to my team, unless any of my other AOE folks want to jump in.
Yeah. Hey, Cassie, it's Anna. I'm in the chat. I'm going to put a link to the guidance to rule changes regarding functional skills and functional performance. It's a document that was released to LEAs in December, but feel free to check it out.
Thank you. Here comes another question. My son had an IEP evaluation in March and was denied based on the 15%. They did not tell us about this change. They also said they could not do a reevaluation for a year. Is that true? My child cannot attend his regular school due to ED, PTSD from an assault at the school. And that's a great question. I know that you'd said earlier about waiting for a year, but if someone was evaluated and they were denied, and now the rule change has come in, how does that impact those that were denied?
So just the important part about what I said earlier is that you have to wait a year if you disagreed with that decision. If that's going to be not part of the equation after July 1, I honestly don't. I'd have to talk to like our legal team probably about that, unless someone here from AOE knows, but I don't know. In terms of if you disagree, there are there are routes, and we didn't go into the layers of that legality because it's pretty layered. But if you could, the first thing you could do is request that independent evaluation if you are disagreeing with the results of the evaluation. And then from there, Anna, do you remember what all that next step?
I mean, I think this is kind of like getting at the before and after the rule change. And so my advice to this family would be, go back to the school and maybe have a chat with them saying, like, you understand that the rule changes will be in effect July 1st, I believe. Would they consider doing a reevaluation if both the parent, I believe, Cassie, you had a line in there, if both the school and the parent agree to a re-eval, that could be an option to go to.
Yes, so even if you did agree with that initial evaluation, you can come back to the LEA now with the rule change and say, hey, I really think I'd like to have my child evaluated again. And if the LEA agrees, then you can proceed without that year mark being. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess the question I would have then is, a parent could also, if this evaluation took place in March, they could go back to the IEP team and say, I've reconsidered my decision on agreeing to the eligibility. And at this time, I'd like to put in writing that I don't agree with the evaluation. I would believe that would be another path. Yes.
We'll have to check into that because we're not off the top of our heads. I don't think we know the timing aspect of that, but I would try to remind people that the change is after July 1st. So if like today you were to go back and ask for the re-eval, you might still be in the same spot.
Okay, thank you. And then I believe this is the last question. Due to the changes in assessment, I think you've just addressed this. Due to the changes in assessment, can they be reevaluated more recently than a year?
So they can. Yeah, it's just going to be going back to that LEA and having that conversation.
Check the chat and see if there's anything else that has come in.
Well, and I am thinking, Cassie, that one of the normal routes for dispute resolution, and perhaps that would be mediation, could also be a parent could always engage in that as well, when there is a disagreement with the school.
Of course, if the LEA were to disagree at that time, then yeah.
Okay, and we're seeing in here some dialogue. A parent may not have disagreed with the information at the time because the rules were different then. Now the rules changed. Seems like the year wait should apply. And someone else responded saying that's not accurate. You can't change your agreement after you agreed and it became part of the eval report.
No, I agree with Stephanie. You can't change if you already agreed to that eval report, you can't say, oh, now I rescind my agreement with that evaluation report. What you can say though is going back to your LEA and clarifying that you might want to reopen the evaluation. And if there's agreement on that, then you could reopen it before the year mark.
Okay, and I see another question. Actually, the questions are now flying in, but we also have a hand raised. Katie Lane Carnett. Can she unmute?
Hi there, it's Katie. May I ask a question? I know that you're going to discuss deaf blindness, it sounds like, next time, but I had two initial questions I was hoping to ask in case they could be addressed today. My kid was qualified for special education under the visual impairment category this year, and she's currently being evaluated also for hearing loss. There's currently no auditory processing disorder evaluation available in Vermont. So we waited months and months and months to go to Massachusetts, and we're waiting for that process to be completed. And I understand we'll need to go through the New England Consortium for deaf blindness. And I'm wondering two parts. First, if she has a medical diagnosis of hearing loss combined with medical diagnosis of vision loss, does the LEA accept a deaf blindness qualification under those two diagnoses, or would we need to move through, for example, the New England Consortium first? And the second part is, I hadn't realized that deaf blindness would be treated differently in terms of adverse effect. And I'm wondering if there's something I could look up in terms of, is that a federal Is that something that's happening federally that needs to be qualified differently, or is that a Vermont state law? And how could I learn a little bit more about that in terms of a child's qualification for special ed?
To be honest, the first question I have some feedback here. Sorry, I'm not able to answer the first question, but I will try to. I would recommend emailing it to me. I know Martha's gonna document some of this, but it would be great to have your email and we can like follow up together with that one, because I do not have the answer to that. Yeah. In terms of the difference between deaf blindness, I find it really helpful to look at that K through 12 evaluation implementation guide. Because while it sounds like it's a big difference initially, all it really means is that it's embedded in the definition of that disability category. So you're still talking about where you see adverse effect. You're still having those conversations. It's just that that adverse effect is essentially assumed within that diagnosis, that there is an adverse effect. I also see Tracy's question about, is there a reason Vermont combines deafness and hearing impairment from IDEA to just hearing loss? I don't have an answer to that. That would be, again, like more of a legal legislative question that I'm happy to look into after this.
Thank you.
We have another question. Could they do a record review with the new eligibility process using the eval results that are already known?
Of course, yeah, that's going to, again, be up to the team decision. If the team all agrees that that's the best method for that individual student's re-eval, then that's a route they could choose to take.
Okay. Let me see if there's any more questions. I'm not seeing any additional, but thank
Jackie
you.
has a hand up, I think.
Jackie?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jackie Kelleher, Executive Director of Vermont Family Network. I'm also the parent of 4 now adult children. So I speak from the parent perspective, fluent IEP in 504. And I'm just providing a comment. Essentially what the AOE has presented is, we're as an IEP team of which we're an equitable partner. We're asking 3 questions. You've heard them referred to as gates. You've heard them referred to as criteria. We're asking, does the student have a disability? Yes or no? If it's yes, we go to the next question. Does the disability adversely affect the educational performance and, functional performance? Yes or no? If it's yes, you move on to the third question is, does this child, need specially designed instruction? And if you got those 3 yeses, ding, 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 eligible for special education. If they're not qualifying or especially designed instruction is not appropriate for the child given their needs, it might be a 504. There's a disability, they might need some accommodations. But as you go through the process, today as the focus is on adverse effect, it is okay to ask questions about the type of evaluation measures or, the professional judgment, the opinions, the observations. It is okay to take a pause, to get more information, like on a standardized measure, if that's part of what's being included for the evaluation package in the area of the suspected disability. It's okay before you sign consent, because you've got to sign informed consent for the evaluation process to go forward. So ask questions. And you can use organizations like Vermont Family Network or the AOE Technical Assistance Line to get information. And then finally, in those guidance documents, the AOE, it's not the responsibility of the state agency to mandate a particular test or measure in areas, but they have given some recommendation of some credible tools that are out there as examples, and also links to websites where you can look up various tools and look at the credibility of those tools and technical property. So just wanted to say it's okay to take a pause and get informed before you do your informed consent. Thank you.
Jackie, actually, I have a question for you, which is one that I posed to Cassie. Jackie, are you still there?
Yes, I am here.
Yeah. If you could just give a quick rundown on that monitoring system and how the AOE, just a very, very brief overview of monitoring.
Well, I'll state by also saying on the AOE website, first, there is a link to general supervision system and monitoring that spells out, there's a manual, there's all the process documents, all of that is open and available. Every 3 years, districts get reviewed through what's called cyclical monitoring. So that's a practice across the state. If there are some unresolved, some non-compliance issues, so if there were written findings of non-compliance, they would then perhaps go into what's called selective monitoring, where they are working more closely with the Agency of Education to correct that non-compliance and also getting technical assistance. And then there's also those that need more intensive intervention or are struggling to correct that non-compliance. Targeted monitoring is the third layer of support. Through those processes, if there are other data points that suggest that there might be something more systemic going on, a district might be selected for an on-site monitoring visit. And that's the example. I think there was a question earlier about IEP reviews, and that's certainly part of that process, is doing a review of student records and files and looking for the compliance with all of those particular forms. It's a robust system. Also on that website, there is a chart that shows the type of it sounds like a scary word, but either sanctions or consequences if districts are out of compliance for a number of years or due to something that's very serious in nature. It describes in that matrix the type of result that happens. So it's really it's important to look into the process. As I said, it's very robust. And there's also listings of districts who are in like meets requirements, needs assistance, needs intervention. That's publicly posted information as well. And you can always ask your district too about their, what was from their latest monitoring report or findings. Folks are very transparent about that type of information, but that is something that you can ask about. And if you have a special ed parent teacher association type group within your district, it's really powerful to be able to pull your latest reports and discuss as a community the areas of strengths and the areas of challenges and how everyone can collaborate to be part of the solution.
I don't see any more questions in the chat at this time. Actually, one just came up. Would an educational interpreter or communication facilitator be considered specialized instruction?
My instinct is to say yes, with the parameters though that person is the most qualified to be delivering that instruction, right? With all the other parameters in line with SDI, that might include collaborating. And I'm sorry, when I say SDI, I mean specially designed instruction. So that might mean that person is also collaborating with that special educator. Those layers in to support the specially designed instructor. But yes, I think in practice, they could be delivering that.
So we have another question.
Wait, and Martha,
Yes.
I think there was some comment put in about early childhood special education. So you might
Yes.
just want to read that.
Yes.
So everyone, has access
Sure, and
to
I
that.
did capture that. Let's see, bear with me. Questions regarding, let's see. Good morning, and overall clarification. Adverse effect applies for ages 6 through 21. It does not apply for ages 3 through 5. Early childhood special education. There are different rules for ages 3 through 5. Questions for ages 3 through 5 can be directed to Katie McCarthy at vermont.gov. Thank you. So we have another one. Have any on-site monitoring visits happened in the past couple of years that you are aware of?
this is something that might be a question that we ask the monitoring team, not something I'm really able to answer. But I'm happy to bring it back to our team.
Thank you.
And sorry, Cassie, in the chat, I also put in the monitoring email and along with their monitoring webpage. So you'll be able to find some more of those monitoring questions and resources there.
Thank you. And Jackie did put in our chat, SDI is defined in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, as adapting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible child under this part, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child that result from the child's disability and to ensure access of the child to the general curriculum. Thank you, Jackie. And I am trying to capture all of these in the chat. Let me see if there's anything else there. Bear with me. Okay, and I think our chat is quiet. I'm not seeing any additional messages at this time. So thank you.
Okay, and Cassie has let us know that for the questions that she didn't have answers for because they don't fall in her area, she will take back to the Agency of Education and try to get those answers. So thank you again, Cassie, for this helpful information. For everyone, you will see a link to the evaluation in the chat. Please take a few minutes to complete it so we can make improvements and fulfill our grant requirements.
We have one last question.
I see that. Go ahead.
Maybe for the next time, do we expect this rule change could be delayed another year at the last moment?
I'm really unable to speak to that question, but happy to bring it back to the team.
Thank you.
So the last time the rule change was delayed, that was because it happened in the legislative activity. So the legislature session is over, and I believe there was no delay in any of that. So I would think there's no real mechanism for delaying at this point. So July 1st is it for all of this. So we have many more workshops coming up, and including session 3 of this special ed rules series. And as Cassie mentioned earlier on, the 3rd session will concentrate on the rule changes in the specific learning disability category. You can find details on our workshops on our homepage of our website. And you can also find links to our previously recorded ones, including today's and last week's. We have a ton of information on our website, and getting connected with us is easy. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram, join our closed Facebook pages if you are a parent. You can also sign up for our monthly e-news or check out our YouTube channel. We are here to help, and as Jackie mentioned, families should feel free to call our helpline if you do have questions about how these rule changes might impact your child's IEP. So contact us by phone, contact us by email. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.